Welcome to Preservation Oaks, the podcast where we invite you to step away from the bustle of everyday life. Settle in and relax, and take a moment to leave the familiar behind as we explore the hidden gems of America that preserve our cultural past. We call them our Preservation Oaks, and with each episode, we'll journey to a different corner of the country, where we'll discover the unique histories, landscapes, and communities that make up our nation. We'll visit with local museums, historical and genealogical societies. They are the stewards of these stories. They preserve the legacy of each place like precious pieces of fabric in a quilt that binds the freedom-loving, hardworking people in this country together. So, slow down, grab a beverage, open your mind, and let us take you on a tour of the fascinating histories and heartfelt traditions that lie just beyond the horizon. This is Preservation Oaks, where every story is a stitch in the fabric of our shared culture. Now, join our host, Sean Radcliffe, as he uncovers another thread in the tapestry of America's heritage and what it takes to preserve it.
Hey, welcome to the Preservation Oaks podcast, where we sometimes take a journey through the most pivotal moments in American history. I'm your host, Sean Radcliffe, and today we're going to explore one of the most tumultuous periods in our nation's past, the American Civil War and its impact on families. From 1861 to 1865, this brutal conflict ravaged the country, leaving deep scars that would take generations to heal. Those years marked one of the most turbulent and defining periods in American history, a time of bitter division, staggering loss, and profound transformation. The American Civil War was not just a battle between North and South. It was a struggle that reached into the very fabric of everyday life, reshaping families, communities, and the national identity. In this episode, we'll explore how the Civil War changed the lives of American families forever, how it tore them apart, how it forced them to adapt, and how its echoes can still be felt today. Before we dive in, a quick shout out to everyone liking, sharing, and subscribing. You're the reason these incredible organizations get the recognition they deserve. If you love what we do, help us spread the word. We're on Podbean, YouTube, Rumble, and nearly every podcast platform. Wherever you listen, hit that like, subscribe, comment, or follow button. Really appreciate it. And hey, if you have an organization in mind that you'd love us to feature, or if you want to be a guest, drop us a line at preservationoaks@gmail.com. All right, let's get this episode rolling. The roots of the conflict had been planted long before the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter. Deep-seated tensions over states' rights, economic disparities, and most significantly, the moral and political battle over slavery had been simmering for decades.
When war finally erupted, it forced ordinary citizens to take sides, often pitting neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, and even father against son. For the families caught in the midst of this great conflagration, life would never be the same. Husbands and sons marched off to war, many never to return. Those who did come back were often scarred, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Women, left to manage farms, businesses, and households alone, faced an entirely new set of challenges, redefining traditional gender roles. Children, exposed to the horrors of war from an early age, grew up quickly, shaped by the loss and hardship that surrounded them. The war did not simply end with a surrender. It lingered in the memories and struggles of the people it touched. The deep wounds it inflicted on American families continued for generations, shaping the way people grieved, rebuilt, and ultimately remembered.
As we explore the complexities of this conflict, we'll review the key events and decisions that led to the outbreak of war. From the 3/5 Compromise to the Fugitive Slave Act, we'll examine the laws and policies that ultimately contributed to the nation's division. We'll hear about families who were torn apart by the conflict and explore the emotional toll it took on those who fought and those who waited at home. From the Anderson brothers of Kentucky to the Lee family, we'll examine the personal stories of families divided by war. As we move into the mid-19th century, the abolitionist movement gains momentum. Figures like Nat Turner, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Beecher Stowe become prominent voices in the fight against slavery. The publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852 fueled anti-slavery sentiment in the North, while the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision further polarized the nation.
Let's examine for a moment the problem of slavery of other people in the United States. First, let's discuss the time period prior to the U.S. Constitution, from 1776 to 1787, when the Declaration of Independence was created in 1776, and it stated that all men are created equal. It did not directly address slavery. A passage condemning slavery, written by Thomas Jefferson, was removed to secure support from Southern colonies. The founders of this nation had a problem, and that was that they needed to get all the colonies aligned and in agreement with the founding documents. Those had to be ratified and signed. They couldn't do that without everyone being in agreement, and so some give and take was necessary. At that time, they were not able to abolish slavery, even though they knew it was wrong for our nation. The U.S. Constitution was adopted in 1787, and that same year, when Congress opened up the Northwest Territories, they specifically prohibited slavery in the Northwest Territory, which is modern-day Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota, setting a precedent for limiting slavery's expansion. The Constitution indirectly acknowledged slavery through several clauses. The 3/5 compromise counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation. The Fugitive Slave Clause required the return of escaped enslaved individuals to their enslavers. And finally, the Slave Trade Clause, which prevented Congress from banning the international slave trade until 1808. This again was a compromise with the Southern states in order to get the Constitution signed, sealed, and delivered for the new nation. Then in 1793, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed, which strengthened the right of enslavers to reclaim runaway slaves, requiring free states to assist in their capture. Between 1777 and 1804, several northern states began passing gradual emancipation laws, leading to further decline in slavery in the North.
Now, let's examine the actions in early 19th century and expansion of slavery from 1800 through 1830. The 1808 U.S. Congress's Act prohibiting importation of slaves officially ended the international slave trade to the U.S., though illegal smuggling continued. Then there was the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state and Maine as a free state, maintaining the balance in Congress. It also banned slavery north of 36 degrees latitude in the Louisiana Territory. There was the Denmark V.C.'s Rebellion of 1822, which was a planned slave revolt in South Carolina. It was foiled and led to stricter laws against black literacy and assembly. There was the 1828 Tariff of Abominations, which increased tensions between the North and South over economic issues, fueling sectionalism and debates over slavery. From 1830 to 1850, we saw rising tensions and the abolitionist movement. In 1831 was Nat Turner's Rebellion. This was a violent slave rebellion which occurred in Virginia and led to harsher slave codes and restrictions on black people, even in free states. From 1836 to 1844, there was a gag rule in the U.S. Congress. It prevented discussion of anti-slavery petitions in the House of Representatives, silencing abolitionist efforts. Through 90% of these years, the Democrat Party had control of the presidency, the House, and the Senate. In 1845, Texas was brought into the Union as a slave state, increasing tensions. From 1846 to 1848, the U.S. was engaged in the Mexican-American War. During that time, the Wilmot Proviso was proposed in Congress. It aimed to ban slavery in new territories acquired from Mexico, but failed to pass. Then, there was the Compromise of 1850, which admitted California to our Union as a free state. It strengthened the Fugitive Slave Act, making it easier to capture and return escaped slaves. It allowed Utah and New Mexico territories to decide on slavery by popular sovereignty. Both territories opted to allow slavery, although it never really caught on, and was abolished when the U.S. Congress passed the 1862 anti-slavery law for U.S. territories. It abolished the slave trade, but not slavery itself, in Washington, D.C. Also in 1850, we saw the Fugitive Slave Act. This made it a federal crime to assist escaped slaves and allowed for their capture even in free states. From 1851 to 1861, the final decade before the Civil War, many different things occurred. Uncle Tom's Cabin was published in 1852. Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel fueled anti-slavery sentiment in the North. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed in 1854. This repealed the Missouri Compromise, allowing new territories to decide on slavery through popular sovereignty. It led to violent conflicts known as Bleeding Kansas between pro- and anti-slavery forces. There was the formation of the Republican Party in 1854, which was founded on opposing the expansion of slavery. There was the Supreme Court decision Dred Scott v. Sanford in 1857, where the Supreme Court ruled that Black people were not U.S. citizens and had no legal standing. It also declared that Congress could not prohibit slavery in the territories, effectively nullifying the Missouri Compromise. Finally, there was John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. John led an abolitionist attack on a federal armory in Virginia aimed at inciting a slave rebellion. Brown was captured and executed, becoming a martyr for the abolitionist cause. Abraham Lincoln was elected as a result of the federal election of 1860. He was a Republican and ran on a platform opposing slavery's expansion, which led Southern states to secede. Immediately after Abraham Lincoln was elected, the Confederacy was formed of Southern states from 1860 to 1861. South Carolina seceded, followed by other Southern states.
From the nation's founding, slavery was a deeply contentious issue, leading to a series of compromises, legal battles, and violent conflicts. While some government actions attempted to limit slavery's spread, others reinforced and protected the institution. The inability to resolve these tensions peacefully ultimately led to civil war in 1861. The American Civil War tore apart not just the country, but also families, communities, and friendships. It wasn't just a war between two sides. It was a civil war in the truest sense, with people fighting each other over deeply held beliefs about issues like slavery, states' rights, and national unity. For families caught in the middle, the emotional toll was immense. Losing a loved one on the battlefield was painful enough, but to know that family members might have been fighting on opposite sides made it all the more devastating. The war created a lasting legacy of grief, even after the guns stopped firing. The personal stories of those families are often some of the most powerful reminders of the cost of war. Many didn't just lose soldiers. They lost brothers, fathers, and sons who had once been close and shared everything, only to be torn apart by the conflict. Here are some of the key ways in which the war affected families. The war killed 650,000 or more Americans and wounded several thousands more. Many families were torn apart as husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons enlisted in either the Union or Confederate armies. The war resulted in numerous casualties, and thousands of soldiers never returned home, leaving their families to cope with grief and loss. Imagine this, a father who supported the South while his sons supported the Union, each fighting on their respective sides, and each facing each other in hard-fought battles. This is a terrible scenario that was repeated time and time again during the Civil War. It was quite common during the American Civil War for family members to fight on opposite sides, particularly due to the deep divisions between the North and the South. The war caused intense personal and regional loyalties, and many families found themselves torn apart by the conflict. The war caused significant economic disruption, particularly in the southern states. Farms and plantations were destroyed, leading to financial struggles for families who relied on agriculture for their livelihoods. Inflation soared, and food shortages were common, putting additional strain on family finances. With so many men away at war, women had to take on new responsibilities and roles. They often had to manage farms or businesses, provide for their families, and assume tasks traditionally performed by men. This period saw a shift in gender roles and expectations. The war brought immense stress and anxiety to families, particularly those with loved ones serving on the front lines. The uncertainty of battle outcomes and the constant fear of death or injury of family members took a heavy emotional toll on many households. Families faced immense emotional strain due to the war, particularly when they had relatives fighting on both sides. After the war, many families struggled with the emotional scars of having lost loved ones in such a bitter and divisive conflict. Reconciliation was difficult for families that had been torn apart by the war, as the rifts between Union and Confederate sympathizers sometimes lasted well beyond the war's end. The Civil War led to large-scale migration and displacement of families, especially in areas heavily affected by the conflict. Some families were forced to abandon their homes and communities, seeking safety elsewhere. The Civil War was also a pivotal moment in the struggle for African American rights and freedom. Enslaved families sought opportunities for emancipation and fought for the abolition of slavery. After the war, the challenges of rebuilding society and reuniting families were significant. The war led to significant social changes, including the end of slavery and the passage of the 13th, and eventually the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. 13th Amendment abolished slavery, officially ended slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime. Ratified on December 6, 1865. 14th Amendment, citizenship and equal protection. Granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S., including formerly enslaved people. Guaranteed equal protection under the law and due process. Ratified on July 9, 1868. 15th Amendment, voting rights for black men. Prohibited federal and state governments from denying the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Ratified on February 3, 1870. The Civil War ended with the abolition of slavery and the emancipation of over 4 million African Americans. These changes, while crucial for the nation, also brought their share of challenges and tensions for families in both the North and the South. The post-war period brought its own set of challenges for families, as they faced the task of rebuilding their lives and communities. Reconstruction efforts and attempts to integrate the southern states back into the Union often sparked further conflict and division. Overall, the American Civil War had a profound and lasting impact on families, shaping their experiences, relationships, and roles in society. It remains a pivotal event in American history that continues to be studied and discussed for its complexities and repercussions.
Here are a few true stories of families divided by the Civil War, illustrating the heartbreaking personal costs of the conflict. There was the Anderson brothers of Kentucky. This family is one of the most famous examples of families torn apart during the Civil War. The family had several sons who fought on both sides of the conflict. James and John Anderson fought for the Confederacy, while their younger brother Robert Anderson served in the Union Army. The brothers faced each other in battle, and James Anderson was even killed by his own brother Robert during a skirmish. The Anderson brothers' tragic story is a symbol of the deep divisions in Kentucky, a border state where loyalties were split, and families were often torn apart by conflicting allegiances. The Lee family is one of the most well-known examples of divided loyalties during the Civil War, primarily due to Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Confederate Army. Robert E. Lee's nephew, Sidney Smith Lee, was a Union officer. While Robert fought for the Confederacy, his nephew was serving in the Union Navy, illustrating how the war divided families. Robert E. Lee's sons also had differing loyalties. His eldest son, Custis Lee, fought for the Confederacy, while his younger son, Arthur Lee, chose to join the Union Army. This family division caused a significant emotional toll. Even though they were united by blood, their allegiances were torn by the political conflict that ravaged the nation. The Harrison family was another example of the Civil War's personal toll. The family's divisions were due to the larger rift between the North and South. Several of the Harrison brothers found themselves on opposite sides. One of the brothers, Benjamin Harrison, fought for the Confederacy while his cousin, William Henry Harrison, sided with the Union. The families, living in Virginia, were divided by their conflicting allegiances. One particular story highlights the emotional distress of the family when they learned of a Harrison brother's death while fighting on the opposite side. The pain was not only due to the loss but also the fact that the brother had fought against a member of his own extended family. The Berry family was from the border state of Maryland, a place where allegiances were often split. The family had members who fought for both the Union and Confederacy. John Berry, the father, supported the Union and sent his sons to fight in the Union Army. However, two of his sons, William and David, chose to fight for the Confederacy, following their convictions and local loyalty to the South. The father, who had been staunchly loyal to the Union, found himself at odds with his own sons during the war. And the family was devastated by the emotional and physical toll the conflict took on their relationship. In one instance, one of the brothers fighting for the Confederacy was wounded in battle and spent time in the same Union military hospital where his father was working, leading to moments of deep personal conflict. The Cobb family of Georgia was another divided family. Howell Cobb, a prominent Southern politician, was a strong supporter of the Confederacy, even becoming a Confederate general. However, his brothers Charles and William Cobb took different paths. While Howell fought for the Confederacy, his brothers were staunch Unionists. The Cobb brothers were forced to face off in combat during the war, and like so many families, they were caught in the painful reality of fighting on opposite sides of the war. The Cobb family's story is particularly poignant because Howell Cobb was a close relative of a U.S. president, making the divide all the more heartbreaking. The Payne family was another family with divided loyalties, though the conflict within the family was influenced by their location in Ohio and Kentucky, two border states with strong Union and Confederate support. One member of the Payne family, William Payne, fought for the Confederacy, while his brother John Payne served in the Union Army. The brothers faced each other in battle at Shiloh in 1862, and John was seriously wounded. Afterward, he and his brother had to confront the emotional toll of their personal conflict.
For many families, these divisions were a lifelong source of grief. In a war as divisive as our Civil War, these personal stories are a reminder of the human cost of political and ideological divisions, where even the closest of relationships were often tested in the crucible of battle.
Here are some major ways the American Civil War profoundly changed life for Black families in the United States. The most immediate and sweeping change was the emancipation of enslaved people. The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 and the eventual passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865 abolished slavery, granting freedom to nearly 4 million Black individuals. However, freedom did not automatically equate to equality or security. The Civil War ultimately led to the abolition of slavery, fundamentally altering the lives of Black families. For generations, enslaved people had lived under a brutal system that denied them basic human rights, subjected them to physical and emotional abuse, and separated family members at the whims of enslavers. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 was a symbolic step toward freedom, but it wasn't until the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865 that slavery was officially abolished nationwide. However, freedom came with uncertainty. Many formerly enslaved individuals had no land, money, or legal protections. Plantation owners, unwilling to part with their free labor force, often refused to acknowledge the emancipation of Black people. Some enslaved individuals were kept in bondage illegally for months or even years after the war ended. Freedom also meant confronting deep-seated racism and systemic barriers designed to keep Black Americans at the bottom of society. Nevertheless, the Civil War gave them an opportunity to start building lives on their own terms, despite the tremendous challenges ahead. During slavery, families were often torn apart when members were sold to different plantations. After the war, many newly freed people searched desperately for lost relatives, placing newspaper ads, traveling long distances, and relying on word of mouth. While some families were reunited, many never found their loved ones. One of the most devastating aspects of slavery was the forced separation of families. Husbands, wives, parents, and children were frequently sold to different plantations, sometimes hundreds of miles apart, with little to no chance of ever seeing one another again. After the war, countless newly freed individuals embarked on desperate searches to reunite with lost relatives. Freedmen's Bureau offices, Black churches, and newspapers played a critical role in this search. Black people posted ads in newspapers like the Christian Recorder and the Freedmen's Journal, hoping to find loved ones. Many traveled on foot across states, following rumors and scraps of information about family members' whereabouts. Some were fortunate enough to reunite, while others were met with heartbreaking dead ends. Despite these efforts, thousands of families remained permanently fractured. The trauma of these separations lingered for generations, shaping Black culture, storytelling, and memory. The Civil War's aftermath reinforced the importance of family ties, leading Black communities to prioritize kinship bonds and mutual support as they built new lives.
After the war, Black families sought economic independence, but few had land or resources. Many were forced into sharecropping, a system that often trapped them in cycles of debt and poverty, as white landowners manipulated contracts to keep them dependent. Freedom did not bring financial security. Most formerly enslaved Black families had no land, tools, or resources to start anew. The federal government initially promised 40 acres and a mule through Special Field Order No. 15, issued by General William Tecumseh Sherman in 1865. However, this promise was largely rescinded when President Andrew Johnson, sympathetic to former Confederate landowners, returned confiscated land to white Southern elites. With limited options, many Black families turned to sharecropping, an exploitative labor system in which they farmed land owned by white landowners in exchange for a share of the crops. While it seemed like a step toward independence, sharecropping often trapped Black families in cycles of debt. Landowners manipulated contracts, charged exorbitant fees for tools and supplies, and ensured that Black workers could never earn enough to break free. This economic oppression reinforced the racial caste system, forcing Black families into a state of semi-slavery well into the 20th century. Despite these hardships, many persevered, gradually acquiring small plots of land and building communities that would become the foundation of Black resilience and resistance. The Civil War and Reconstruction led to the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments, granting Black people citizenship and voting rights. However, these gains were met with violent backlash, including the rise of Black codes, Jim Crow laws, and white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, which sought to undermine their newfound rights. The Reconstruction period from 1865 to 1877 brought significant legal advancements for Black Americans. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law, while the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. Black families saw these laws as steps toward full participation in American democracy, and many men eagerly registered to vote and ran for office. However, these gains were met with fierce resistance from white supremacists. Southern states enacted black codes, laws designed to restrict black people's movement, economic opportunities, and legal rights. White vigilante groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, used terror to suppress black political participation. By the end of Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws replaced black codes, institutionalizing segregation and disenfranchisement. The fight for civil rights would continue for another century, with black families leading the charge for justice.
Before the war, teaching enslaved people to read and write was often illegal. After emancipation, black communities prioritized education, founding schools and colleges with the help of organizations like the Freedmen's Bureau. Many formerly enslaved parents were determined to give their children the education they were denied. One of the first priorities for freed black families was education. Under slavery, literacy was forbidden or severely restricted, as enslavers feared that educated black people would resist oppression. After the war, formerly enslaved individuals of all ages sought to learn how to read and write. The Freedmen's Bureau, Northern missionaries, and black churches established schools across the South. Parents, many of whom had been denied education, prioritized sending their children to school. Historically black colleges and universities, such as Howard University and Fisk University, emerged to provide higher education. Despite violent opposition, including attacks on black schools, black families remained committed to education as a path to independence and empowerment. Their dedication laid the foundation for future generations of black intellectuals, activists, and leaders. Many black families moved from rural areas to cities in search of work and safety. Some traveled north or west to escape Southern racial violence, setting the stage for later migrations that would shape black urban communities in the decades to come. The Civil War and its aftermath spurred internal migration. Some black families left plantations to find work in cities, while others traveled north and west to escape racial violence. This migration foreshadowed the Great Migration of the 20th century, during which millions of black Americans moved from the rural South to urban centers in search of better opportunities. The seeds of black urban culture, including vibrant artistic and political movements, were planted in this period of post-war migration. With newfound rights, black men entered politics, serving in local, state, and even federal positions during Reconstruction. Figures like Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce became U.S. senators, and hundreds of black men held positions in state legislatures and local governments. During Reconstruction, black men voted in large numbers and held political office for the first time. Over 2,000 black men served in local, state, and federal government roles, including Congress. Black political participation helped shape public policy on issues such as education, land ownership, and civil rights. However, Democrat-led white supremacists worked to dismantle black political power through intimidation, fraud, and voter suppression. By the 1890s, Southern states had imposed poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses to disenfranchise black voters, a struggle that would last well into the civil rights movement. Black women took on leadership roles within their families and communities, working as educators, activists, and business owners. Many also became key figures in churches, which became central to black social and political life after the war. Black women took on crucial roles in the post-war era. Many became educators, business owners, nurses, and activists, helping to uplift their communities. Figures like Sojourner Truth and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper fought for both racial and gender equality. The war's aftermath also reshaped black families, as women often became heads of households due to the loss of men in battle or economic hardships. Black women navigated new roles as caregivers, workers, and community leaders in the struggle for stability and progress. Black churches flourished in the post-war years, serving not just as places of worship, but as community centers, schools, and political meeting places. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, for example, played a crucial role in advocating for Black rights. The Civil War strengthened the role of Black churches, which became centers of spiritual, social, and political life. Independent Black denominations, such as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, grew rapidly. Churches provided education, economic assistance, and a platform for civil rights activism. They helped Black families navigate the uncertainties of freedom and oppression, fostering a sense of resilience and solidarity. The war may have ended slavery, but it did not end racism. Black families faced continued violence through lynchings, race riots, and other forms of oppression. The fight for true equality continued into the 20th century with the civil rights movement. Despite this, Black families resisted. They formed advocacy groups, filed lawsuits, and laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement. The fight for equality continued across generations, proving that the Civil War's impact on Black families was both devastating and transformative.
When conducting genealogical research on families affected by the American Civil War, several research techniques can help discern the impact of the war on the family. Here are some techniques to consider. Compare census records before, during, and after the war to identify changes in family structure, occupation, and location. For example, the 1860 census may show a family living in a particular location, while the 1870 census may reveal that they had moved or that some family members were missing. Research military records such as pension files, service records, and muster rolls to determine if family members served in the war. These records can provide valuable information about a soldier's experiences, injuries, and interactions with other family members. Look for documents related to the war, such as draft records, bounty land warrants, pension applications, prisoner of war records, court-martial records, and letters and diaries written during the war. Research local and state records, such as county court records, tax records, property records, newspaper articles, local histories, and regimental histories. If your family was enslaved or owned slaves, research the impact of emancipation on your family. Look for records related to slave schedules, Freedmen's Bureau records, emancipation petitions, and other records, sharecropping contracts, African American newspapers and publications, as well as local and state records related to African American communities. The Civil War led to significant migration patterns, particularly during Reconstruction. Research migration records, such as passenger lists, railroad records, wagon train records, and migration patterns of neighboring families. Women and children played crucial roles during the Civil War, often managing farms, businesses, and households while men were away fighting. Research records related to women's diaries and letters, children's experiences during the war, women's roles in the war effort. Examples include nursing and aid societies, utilize online resources such as National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA, the Library of Congress, Ancestry.com, Fold3.com, FamilySearch.org, and Civil War-era newspapers and publications. Collaborate with experienced genealogists, historians, and Civil War experts to gain a deeper understanding of the war's impact on your family. Join local genealogical and historical societies and national organizations such as the National Genealogical Society or the Civil War Genealogical Society to access resources, expertise, and networking opportunities. By employing these research techniques, you can gain a more comprehensive understanding of how the American Civil War affected your family and develop a more nuanced and accurate family history.
The U.S. Civil War which raged from 1861 to 1865, had an incredible impact on American families, leaving scars that were felt for generations. For millions of Americans, the war meant losing loved ones, being torn apart by conflicting loyalties, and witnessing the permanent disruption of their way of life. Brothers fought against brothers, fathers lost sons, and families on both sides faced unbearable emotional and physical costs. The devastation wasn't limited to the battlefield. It also ravaged homes, communities, and entire ways of life. The war created irreparable divides within families as individuals who once shared common bloodlines found themselves on opposite sides of an ideological battle. The psychological toll was equally severe. In many cases, families were divided by deeply held beliefs about slavery, states' rights, and national unity, forcing people to choose sides in a conflict that often felt like a fight between personal identity and national destiny. The aftermath of the war saw families trying to rebuild their lives amidst the ruins of a country that had been literally and figuratively torn apart. The loss of life, the disruption of economic systems, the forced relocation of people, and the long-lasting trauma endured by soldiers and civilians alike created a legacy of grief, division, and hardship that stretched far beyond the 1860s. Remember that it was 100 years or more beyond the Civil War that God provided Pastor Martin Luther King Jr. to help resolve the insanity of racism. I'm retired, and I sometimes see videos on the streaming platforms that talk about a new civil war in America. Will there be one? Should there be one? What's the way forward? And is it unavoidable? Today, as we find ourselves facing deep divisions in our nation once again, over issues like political ideology, gender, protections for women, and cultural identity, it's crucial to remember the profound cost of a civil war. Whether in terms of bloodshed or the social and emotional fractures it would leave in its wake. The stakes are just as high now as they were in the 19th century, but the devastating consequences of fighting against one another in a civil conflict would be far-reaching and impossible to undo. Families today must ask themselves, what would it cost all of us if we allowed ourselves to be pulled apart by hatred, partisanship, and division? How many lives would we lose, not just on the battlefield, but in our homes, in our communities, in our very identity as a nation? Before we allow the current ideological rifts in our society to escalate into conflict, like burning automobiles, jailing political enemies, or hurting people in different ways, we have to examine and fully understand the terrible costs that a civil war exacted upon families. We degrade ourselves and our ideals as a nation by taking part in or condoning these things. The politicians in this nation are more fully to blame for the divide in this nation, as they are the elected leaders. Before we do anything else, perhaps it's time to put term limits on these politicians and to elect new leaders who have the good sense to keep us all from harm, instead of this constant railing and blood boiling that we see from them today that will only lead to a deep self-inflicted wound in our nation. Any politician acting like this is just a very stupid person who doesn't deserve the mantle of leadership. Remember that we, the people, are more than 300 millions, and that the politicians are just a small cabal who are a mere fraction of us. Not only that, but we cater to these politicians every day of their lives. We take care of them and their children and their families. They have good salaries. They make millions in other ways. We protect them with security details. We feed them, clothe them. And for that, we, the people, expect and deserve leaders who will find a way forward and work together for our benefit. The moment they cease to fulfill that duty to us and to foment civil war and discord among us, we need to replace them as quickly as possible for the sake of our future and our families. Please wake up. Focus on a bright future together as Americans and neighbors who have a shared interest in the success of our country. The tears, wounds, and destruction of those long ago times should serve as a powerful warning. Any kind of modern civil war would not be the same as the last one. It would go on for a long time, involve both men and women in the conflict, and leave scars that would affect not just those who lived through it, but also the generations that follow. If we're to move forward as a nation, we must find ways to deal with our divides by using the rule of law. We must elect leaders who actively identify common ground and work together to avoid the devastating legacy of a war that we would all ultimately regret. The cost to families, then and now, is far too great to ignore, and we are doomed to repeat history if we don't learn from it. We needn't be afraid, but rather be informed and aware of the pitfalls. Thank you for joining me on this journey covering the American Civil War. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Music used today is from Cymbalbird and Scott Holmes.
Microstream Radio is a registered trademark. You can visit at www.microstreamradio.com. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted by Microstream Radio. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, reproduced, copied, or used anywhere without the written permission of Microstream Radio. Preservation Oaks starring Sean Radcliffe originates in Salt Lake City, Utah. Be sure to join us for our next episode on your favorite podcast platform. This is Matthew Adams speaking. Preservation Oaks has come to you through the worldwide podcast platform Podbean, and our home is preservationoaks.podbean.com. Hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If so, please like, follow, comment, and or subscribe. Remember that being free means being free to be curious, and that historical and genealogical societies and museums allow us to discover the past, be free to explore where curiosity opens every door. Thanks to everyone for listening. Stay cozy, curious, and keep exploring the incredible stories that shape our world. Remember to cherish and support the preservation of history in your own communities. The content of this program is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Some material included in this program may be copyrighted by third parties. However, under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act, the doctrine of fair use allows the limited use of copyrighted material without requiring permission from the rights holders when used for purposes such as education, criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. These uses are legally permitted even if they might otherwise constitute infringement. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this program for purposes beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner. If you believe your copyrighted material has been used in this program in a way that does not qualify as fair use, please contact us at Preservation Oaks at gmail.com. Thank you.
This is Sean Radcliffe. We'll see you all next time on Preservation Oaks. And until then, keep on giving and keep on living the good life.